I think you mentioned in the context of a social democracy that freedom of speech and freedom of the press, or basically the freedom of people to have a voice, is an important component, which I think is something that caught my ear a little bit. Because if you think about the Soviet Union, one of the ways uh, that the authoritarian regime was able to control, it's almost part of the central planning, is you have to control the message and you have to limit the freedom of the press. So there's a kind of notion, especially in like ideas or maybe caricatures of the ideas of cultural Marxism, sometimes caricatured even further as wokeism, that you want to be careful with speech. You want to censor speech because some speech hurts people. So in some sense, you want to respect the value, the equality of human beings by being careful with the words you say. So what is there a tension there for you?
I think there's no tension. And in part, I think that it is very condescending or patronizing to assume that people can't take debate, that people can't, either as a society or individuals, visually be engaged in the exchange of ideas without, or even very vigorous debate without, being broken by it. It's just not the case. I'm basically a free speech absolutist. I mean, I would draw the line at obviously direct incitements of violence or certain other speech like that. But in general,
Do you think a lot of people would be surprised to hear that?
no. I mean, not people who know my work. I mean, more generally, I think a lot of people on the right, um, even in the center, I think might have the idea that a lot of the far left wants to censor them. I think some of the center left wants to censor them, but I think a lot on the far left, on the Marxist or socialist left, I think that free speech is more or less the norm.
Yeah, where is the imperative to censor coming from? Is this just some small subset of the left on Twitter? Is there some philosophical idea behind certain groups that, like, if we're to steel man the case, and which group actually has the interest of humanity in mind in wanting to censor speech?
I think we might need to just take it case by case or an example by example, because honestly, I would have to think about a particular case. But let's just say generally that a lot of American liberalism rightly sees the revolution around the civil rights and later the extension of this rights revolution for gay rights and so on as being a very positive achievement of the last half century, and I completely agree. Now, for me, now that we've won those rights, a lot of our battle for change needs to go beyond the representational realm and needs to really reground itself in the material bread and butter struggles of ordinary people trying to survive, the battle for good healthcare for all Americans, and so on. These are my immediate demands. I think there's a segment of American liberalism that doesn't want to go in that confrontational economic direction and wants to steer it away from battles over things like universal healthcare and so on, and really are just still caught at this battle over rights and representation. And it's devolved in such a way that they feel like they need to make change. The way they make change is only through interventions in culture, because they don't really have the same sense of class and class struggle that agree or disagree with it. It's a very material plane. So instead, they look at comedians who said the wrong thing, or they look at all sorts of other ways to make change. It's not really making a change; it's just making them look bad and making our culture worse. And I think that's where a lot of it comes from. But I think that a lot of the left, even the left that's much more into battles over, race and lots of other stuff, like real serious anti-racist on the left. Of course, I'm an anti-racist, but a lot of my work is focused on the primacy of class. But even these people are very concerned about material struggles and issues, and they don't really care about, these issues they think are ephemeral kind of issues.
So when you focus exclusively on language, that somehow leads you astray, like on being concerned about language without like deeper economic inequalities and so on, you just become an asshole that's on Twitter pointing out how everything, how racist everyone is. So the anti-racism becomes a caricature of anti-racism.
Exactly, because anti-racism was really about the struggle of people for equal rights in voting. It was about the struggle for people who were trapped into bad neighborhoods because they couldn't get decent jobs and their neighborhoods were redlined or whatever else. It was really like a struggle for survival. And what was the main demands? Like the language of this one, it was the march for jobs and freedom. It was the slogan "I am a man," asserting the kind of universal dignity of people. This is what the civil rights movement was and it wasn't surprised there was a lot of self-described socialists, people like Bayard Rustin, A. Philip Randolph, Martin Luther King Jr. I mean, these were people who were Ella Baker. They were socialists, and I think a lot of Americans agree with them with their immediate demands, even though they weren't themselves socialists. But it was a very materialistic struggle, and I think a lot of this has been co-opted into just some sort of vague and just disconcerting complaints about language or culture and so on.
Martin Luther King was a socialist. To what degree was he a socialist? I would love to learn about that.
Martin Luther King, I think, broadly called himself at various points in his life a Christian socialist or a democratic socialist, especially after his speech against the Vietnam War in the Riverside Church. I think that was 1967. The last years of his life, he became much more involved in struggles against the war and also struggles for workers' rights. He was assassinated when he was at a rally at workers' rights. So he thought the next battle was going to be an economic battle. He had this famous line where he said, I don't just want to integrate the lunch counter if it means that we can't afford to order a burger while we're there. That was the line along those lines. And I think that got to his point where the civil rights struggle was part of a step of building some sort of wider movement. So he and these other civil rights leaders were very much interested in working with organized labor, working with the left as it was constructed then, and building some sort of mass base for not just rights but redistribution.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's fascinating which figures self-identified and were in part socialists.
Albert Einstein was one.
Albert Einstein was a
Albert
socialist?
Einstein wrote an article for the first issue of this left-wing magazine. It's actually still publishing today, called Monthly Review, and I think 1949. And his article is called "Why Socialism." I don't think it's paywalled, so people should check it out. But yeah, Einstein was one.
Huh.